I wish that the model of the Dalai Lama were more readily available. But on the other hand, I don't think we should assume that Christian doctrine or any other religious doctrine is absolutely static and unchangeable.
Yeah, well, I'm not making that point. If just for 30 seconds, if I could just say that what troubles me, and I know troubles Richard about this, is that religious people tend not to be honest about where those changes are coming from. They're coming from, to my mind, the hammer blows of modernity that make certain religious doctrines untenable. So, for instance, now the Pope is rethinking the doctrine about contraception. You know,
Yeah.
maybe a married couple, within the context of a marriage, if one is HIV positive, maybe it's okay to use a condom. Let's say he gives ground on that.
Yeah.
That will not be a sign of the vibrancy of Christian dialogue getting to the truth of the matter. That will be a sign of a given religious dogma becoming untenable in the face of its practical consequences and in the face of the fact that there's no good reason to have it there in the first place. And so what Pat is referencing about the Dalai Lama is quite a bit more seditious than that. I mean, the Dalai Lama has said, if science proves any principle of Buddhism to be incorrect, science wins. Now, that is a much more radical statement coming from the head of a church. And what I heard Richard saying, which I fully agree with, is if these are all just books, you know, we have a choice between having a 21st century dialogue about ethics and the nature of reality, or we can fixate ourselves in the first century if we're going to hold to the New Testament, or the 7th century if we're going to hold to the Quran. And if there's something good in the Bible that is really standing the test of time, which I think there is. I mean, it's not much of it, I don't think, but the Golden Rule, for instance, I think is one of the most beautiful distillations of our ethical impulses. We can use the Golden Rule in the 21st century without believing anything preposterous, and we can see the wisdom of it, and then we can jettison all the rest that we effectively jettison anyway, because nobody's reading Leviticus now and saying we should be killing people for working on the Sabbath.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting program. So I mean, we'll see how that plays out.
Could we just one quick comment from Neil, and then Carolyn Porco, I think, will take us to the break. And I think we'll have a chance later on for doing more about the Dalai Lama.
I actually only had a couple of simple comments, but then you invited me down here, and now I'm all steeped in Buddhist philosophy. I was really going to just make a couple of, I wanted to tidy up a couple of loose ends that were dangling. One of them is the fact that you were citing, not to generalize, but sort of sexist philosophy's influence on the science that gets done or interpreted for biology, and using that to generalize what's bad about science or what needs to be fixed about science, when in fact that's a frontier of science that is subject to the vagaries of funding and of bias. But that's the skin on this growing apple that is science. Science is this collection of understandings that works. And if you're only going to look at the frontier of that, of course it's going to flip back and forth. And so that is not the measure of what science is. The measure of science is the body of knowledge and understanding that sits behind us right now, and we're standing on that firmly because evidence and experiment and the application of scientific methods has demonstrated that. And so I just want to make it clear that, and reflecting on Sam's point, by the way, if that proves to be false, those assertions, it'll probably be proved to be false not by a sociologist who declares it's false because it doesn't sound good sociologically, but because there's evidence that says that it's untenable. But a different point I wanted to make was regarding you made this point about estrogen and the fluctuations of scientific truth on the frontier. There's a term in the equation here that has not been mentioned, and that is the role of the media. While it is true that occasionally a scientist will conduct a press conference, that happened with Stanley Pons and Fleischmann for cold fusion. And by the way, no other responsible scientific lab was able to verify those conclusions, and so it was quickly removed from the table of science. But if you look at what medical journalists do, they subscribe to the New England Journal of Medicine, and it lands in their office, and they comb the top pages, and they make news stories on what are scientific results that are just fresh out and unverified by other groups, unre-verified by the same group perhaps. And so that's part of the equation of the confusion of the public. I'm agreeing with you that we have to be, as a community, sensitive to what the public who hears the scientific result is to think when they see it flipping back and forth. And the media and the scientists who are exposed to the media need to be much more sensitive about reporting the uncertainties of a result or the reliability or the repeatability of that result as it comes forth. And so, but to indict an entire industry or community because that's how it comes out on the edges, I think undersells the true value of science to the world.
Yeah, I think your point is similar to Francisco's, and I apologize if I have castigated science as a whole. So just to be clear, once again, I'm talking about trying to understand someone in the public who can't tell whether the needle is flipping back and forth, and trying to understand the position that that person is in, and that person has to be more than scientifically literate. They actually have to make a call on a scientific claim. And I think that's
a lot of that burden is on the journalist, I would say.
Now, but the other thing is that I still think, if I may say, that there's a slight glossing over of scientific culpability in this, because if we take another, in the case of the estrogen and breast cancer and so on, of course it was, subsequent work did not confirm it and it was changed. But then there's the issue of the gay gene that was reported by Hammer. Now we know that's not been confirmed, and yet that hasn't been withdrawn from the table. And over again, there are scientific claims that are not true, and that we all know are not true, but are not pulled off. So I don't think that that our slate is as clean as you'd like to believe, and I'd like to believe. And I think that therefore, in a circumstance like this, where we're all here and we can promise to do a better job, we have to put our dirty linen on the table and just acknowledge that.
I'm going to have one last comment on Richard Dawkins. It'll be quick. I was in the back row as you spoke, and so I could see sort of the whole room as the words came out of your mouth, as beautifully as they always do, and as articulately as they always do. And let me just say, your commentary had a sharpness of teeth that I had not even projected for you. It's more. It was my first time meeting him, and so I felt you more than I heard you, and I asked the question, and it gets back a little to what Francisco was getting at. You're a professor of the public understanding of science, not professor of delivering truth to the public. And these are two different exercises. One of them is you put the truth out there, and like you said, they either buy your book or they don't. Well, that's not being an educator. That's just putting it out there. Being an educator is not only getting the truth right, but there's got to be an act of persuasion in there as well. Persuasion isn't always, here's the facts, you're either an idiot or you're not. It's here are the facts, and here is a sensitivity to your state of mind, and it's the facts plus the sensitivity, when convolved together, creates impact. And I worry that your methods and how articulately barbed you can be ends up simply being ineffective when you have much more power of influence than what is currently reflected in your output.
I gratefully accept the rebuke. Just one anecdote to show that I'm not the worst in this thing. A former and highly successful editor of New Scientist magazine, who actually built up New Scientist to great new heights, was asked, "What is your philosophy at New Scientist?" And he said, "Our philosophy at New Scientist is this: science is interesting, and if you don't agree, you can fuck off."
Well, on that note, we need to